So then I put up a slide of the pickup backing up to a dock with the most beautiful fresh produce and eggs of all kinds. You can tell that the young woman had driven just a few miles and was so proud of what she had to offer. And I juxtaposed those two images, the large quantities, standardized 365-day consistent delivery versus the reality of farming, especially New England, which you have a certain month where you're going to harvest a certain item in a relatively small quantity. And because our folks are typically growing organic, it's not going to be a consistent shape, size, or color, or maturity for that matter. So the system, the industrialized, concentrated corporate food system cannot digest, figuratively speaking, cannot digest small deliveries of non-standardized goods from one-off vendors.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, the co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish soil-grown crops and pasture-raised livestock under the organic seal. You just heard from Lewis of Natural Grocers about how difficult it is for a small organic farmer to navigate getting shelf space at their local food cooperative, natural food store, or supermarket. Alan's presentation about the consolidation in the natural food distribution space at our first annual Real Organic Symposium at Dartmouth was hands down the most talked about talk of the day. Most of us were really stunned after hearing what he had to say, because we see those natural food stores as the place that we can go to support our local farmers. Alan will be back at our 2022 symposium, which is the last Sunday of January and the first Sunday of February. But until then, here is the two of us last year talking about these issues, and we can dig into these bombshell revelations that got so much attention the first time around. So I'm talking today with Alan Lewis, who does government and industry affairs for Natural Grocers Vitamin Cottage. I had to look that title up, Alan. Is that a new one?
Advocacy and Government Affairs. Yeah, it's brand new.
Advocacy.
It's what I've been doing for a long time, but it helps to have that on my email and my business card. It gets people focused because I do so many other things. Now I know what I'm supposed to work on.
I live in Durango here, and it has a hopping Natural Grocers, so I know all about it. But tell people who don't have one close by what Natural Grocers is.
Well, Natural Grocers is one of those old school, purist, family-run health food stores. Started 65 years ago. Since then, the second generation, which is now in their 50s and 60s, has taken over the company and expanded to 20 states with 160 stores. But the nice thing is those core principles of clean products and transparent communications to the customers for where their food comes from still stays in place. Small stores, not a lot of food service, but really dedicated to providing carefully curated and affordable health food to support all sorts of special diets.
So, Alan, you rocked the house about a little over a year ago at the first Real Organic Project Symposium. You kind of woke us all up to the realities of how difficult it is for farmers to get shelf space. And frankly, it was kind of a depressing talk, but very eye-opening. It was almost everybody's favorite talk of the day, and there were some really good talks that day.
Ouch.
But I think people don't really understand how it works and what it takes to get shelf space. So I'm wondering if we could go over it a little bit more today. And I'm curious, just to start off, do you still feel that way a year later?
Yeah, it's the same and more right now. I'm surprised at the reception of that talk too. I think it was deeply disturbing to people who were doing all the right things and putting their life's energy and savings and resources into developing clean agricultural products and processed products for retail, and expecting if they do things right and are persistent, that little piece of the American dream will come through for them. And what I asked them to do is understand what it's like to be a corporate category buyer. And a corporate category buyer for a grocery chain That might include Costco or Walmart or sometimes natural grocers or even the independents. They, I guarantee you, are overworked. They have way too much information and too many choices to make. And so, understanding from the producer's perspective that funnel of how things get chosen to be promoted at retail is really important. So I'm going to walk you through that briefly, but the reason I did that wasn't to piss people off or frighten people, is that there are ways to circumvent that or respond to it or counteract it. But unless you know what you're up against, you can get really frustrated and waste a lot of time and money. So to put it in perspective, I pulled deep data. It's getting a little bit old, but it's probably still accurate from 2012. And those 52 weeks, there were roughly 600,000 labeled consumer food products sold in the United States. Consider it 600,000 unique UPC codes on packaged goods. And of those, about 120,000 you might consider natural, or SPINS considers natural. And of those, about 25,000 are organic of some percentage. And actually, at the time, it was 23,000 or so that were certified organic. And that's across all categories, from meat to dairy to frozen to packaged goods and dry goods. So out of the gate, you've got these corporate buyers having to triage what they're going to sell. And I guess at the risk of oversimplifying it, you have to realize that as the concentration of retailers has increased and there's many fewer entities, each owning many different outlets, the requirement for consistency, for standardization, for regular deliveries of exactly the right product in the exactly right amount, that doesn't go away. It actually becomes a bigger requirement. So I don't know how much Costco or Walmart or Target buys in food, but I can tell you that it's sometimes by the train load or the freighter load, or certainly a full truckload. And then that goes into their distribution center. And every store that's being distributed to has already been allocated X amount of that product on a pallet or cases or whatever. And then that's worked into planograms. Here's where you're going to put it. It's aisle 7, it's shelf 8, it's or section 8, position 3. And that's how the business is being managed. So then I put up a slide of the pickup backing up to a dock with the most beautiful fresh produce and eggs of all kinds. You can tell that the young woman had driven just a few miles and was so proud of what she had to offer. And I juxtaposed those two images, the large quantity, standardized, 365-day consistent delivery versus the reality of farming, especially New England, which you have a certain month where you're going to harvest a certain item in a relatively small quantity. And because our folks are typically growing organic, it's not going to be a consistent shape, size, or color, or maturity for that matter. So the system, the industrialized, concentrated corporate food system, cannot digest, figuratively speaking, cannot digest small deliveries of non-standardized goods from one-off vendors. And it sounds a little dry the way I'm putting it right now, but it is such a huge problem. And I use natural grocers as an example. We're involved in our local food communities. We try to find consistent local deliveries. We try to work on aggregation. We work with local distributors and aggregators like Organically Grown in the Northwest, which does a spectacular job. That part of the logistics and local food system is really under distress and not really working that well. And that was intentional. The big food aggregated system has bought up distributors and closed them, closed warehouses, stopped running trucks. So in Colorado, for instance, most of our food, 95+%, comes over the mountains or up from Mexico in the Southwest and Florida, on trucks and trains, and it will literally pass thousands of acres of productive farmland that where we are no longer growing food, especially vegetables, because the logistical connection is no longer there. So you have the need for consistent, standardized, year-round deliveries working against small producers. But also, I have small producers, actually like you, Lindley, who can be very close to our store, but the logistical reach seems like thousands of miles. So getting down and looking from the producer's perspective, and I remember meeting some small yogurt producers at the symposium at Dartmouth, and they had this beautiful fresh yogurt from their own cows. And I was sitting next to her and talking about this, and then she heard my presentation and she kind of teared up, realizing that the big brands are going to be able to get that consistent standardized delivery to the largest retailers where the most demand is. And that her ability to play in that arena was really not realistic. So we talked briefly about the standardization of the food industry, and we talked about the logistics, but the third part is the economics of getting shelf space. So Natural Grocers is not guilty of this, but if you want shelf space at a large retailer, you have to buy those square inches. And not only that, but you have to pay for any lost profits that the chain loses by removing the other brand that was there. So you're buying that shelf space, you're providing free product, and you're guaranteeing a level of profit based on the prior product's profit and P&L for that company. Well, a dairy with 50 or 100 cows making a few thousand cups of yogurt on a daily basis or a weekly basis, they're just economically outscaled, even if they had the capital. And it's just a game that prevents small scale producers from even contemplating playing with that. And that was the kind of the downside of my message. And then we ran out of time, and I cut it short and left the stage because we really needed to get back on schedule. And that's kind of left a taste in people's mouth like, geez, what a downer this guy is. Can't he bring some solutions to the table?
Do you have some solutions? Is that what you're telling me? You had some to present?
Well, my point is, I don't think they're earth-shattering solutions, but if you are a small producer, find those consistent long-term small buyers that match your scale and that they in turn can't play that scaled up game, or they have a niche in the market where they're trying to work with small local producers. And if they educate their customers correctly, their customers are willing to pay more or the true cost of the food that a small producer is growing so that it can all be economically viable over the long run. The tragedy right now is that it was the smaller restaurants and food service and food delivery services that were becoming an underpinning for local food production. It was a big seller, and they were bringing in so many things on the menu or in their, small regional and local commissaries, that there was a good, reliable business. And they could buy a few 100 pounds of carrots or onions or zucchini at a time because that's the scale of the lots and the production that they're making, or the scale of a week's worth of food service in a restaurant. And the tragedy is COVID has blown that up. And the return of the farmers market slowly but surely has helped. The CSA's obviously got a big rejuvenating booster in the arm on that. But in the long run, it seems like half of restaurants will be gone, and food is definitely shifting towards home preparation. So we need to find those ways to get consumers to buy local again. And as I've said, with the capture of the food system by large retailers in this highly mechanized, standardized, and centralized purchasing and distribution system, the ability of the will and the ability to buy local in small quantities is largely non-existent.
You know what was surprising to me as a farmer trying to break into that scene is that I just thought if you can make $2 or $3 off of a pint of cherry tomatoes, what does it matter to the grocery store whether it's, comes from my box or Wholesome Harvest box, right? If it's the same amount per pint. But what I didn't realize, and maybe you can explain this better, is that they're assuming some sort of loss after the fact. So if my product is more expensive to start, that gets marked against me, even if they still make $3 per sale. Do you know what I mean? So that was shocking to me. It was like, well, you can make the same amount of money, maybe even more from mine, but they still preferred the other one. And it didn't have to do with, I'm sure a portion of it was just the regularity with which they could, bring in the Wholesome Harvest product, but it also had to do with this assumption that there was going to be loss left over. And when the reality was my product sold all the time, it would sell out, but it still counted against me because, can you explain that a little bit?
Well, yeah,
because that was confusing to me.
Let's use the proper scale. So let's say you have $1,000 at wholesale of tomatoes, which is Wholesome Harvest, potentially their biggest product, and all grown in containers using hydroponic systems. So you sell to a store $1,000, and $100 of that is mishandled, it's ruined, it's touched, it ends up being thrown away. And so let's say that it should have been $2,000 worth of revenue for the store after paying you $1,000 for the tomatoes. But $100 at wholesale is missing, so there's only $1,800 rung up. That's generally referred to as shrink. And it's one example of the way the cost of goods, of produce in particular, often exceeds. Very often produce departments break even because it's labor intensive, and produce isn't particularly expensive compared to what consumers are willing to pay for it. So there's not a lot of gross margin to begin with. Labor damages a lot of that, and shrink hits the rest. But to answer your question, if you multiply that times 1,000, Wholesome Harvest and Driscoll's have customers that are buying $10 million a year. And there's enough spackle in that transaction that those shipments, which are in plastic for a reason, obviously, to reduce shrink, they're picked green and ripened in gas and delivered hard, and then they kind of ripen partly on the shelf and partly in the kitchen for a reason, all to reduce shrink and make sure that nothing gets moldy before it runs down the register track. But those are often delivered with a swell or a shrink allowance, meaning that those companies might say, here's the price, here's what you can expect to get out of your retail sale. We're going to take 10% off to begin with, but that's just assuming that you have all of these problems before you actually ring up the sale. Now, theoretically, you could do that, but the system is built for the big guys to do that automatically, and still everyone has real fat margins, or let's say reliable margins, since I don't have access to their P&Ls. But it's the scale issue in terms of the total money in the deal, the possibility of shrink, and the way the industrial system delivers things that are designed not to shrink, and then also kicks in allowances. So from a risk perspective, and there's a second answer, but from a risk perspective, how great is it that the store probably expects zero shrink from an economic perspective on those deliveries? And yet here you are trying to deliver fresh vine-ripened tomatoes that probably have 3 good days left and will be absolutely delicious. And then boom, they start to shrivel, or whatever happens after they've been handled or left out at room temperature or a hot temperature or something.
So if I'm so convinced that my product's going to disappear, which I am, because I've seen it happen,
right?
I could say to the store, I guarantee no shrink. Like if there's any shrink, I will pay you back. Would that be something that would make sense to do?
Well, that's pay on sale, right? So you have a UPC on there or some identifier at the cash register. And on a rolling basis, if you trust the store, they say, okay, pull up the report for Lindley, and it says I sold $1,950 worth of tomatoes. We're going to pay her 50% of that for those tomatoes. That could be the deal that you put in place. That's all well and good until somebody misreports or grossly mishandles the product, because suddenly they don't have any risk. And so they can literally leave it sitting on the dock and turn it into fly-filled mush, and they had no sales, and you've lost that product. Now, those are extreme ends of the spectrum, but it's easier to do a handshake deal with an owner of a small store like you're talking about, who you trust and is part of the community and will certainly be embarrassed if they don't honor the deal, and also someone who's very much aware of how to handle produce in this particular example. When you're getting into the 5:30 a.m. shift of a minimum wage worker at a massive grocery store who's had 30, 40 minutes of training, and their job is to get stuff off the truck, put it in the cooler, get it prepped, and put it out on the shelf all day long. The big produce marketers are trying to package and deliver their products in a way that person, and I'm not going to say they don't care, but let's just say their job description and conditions don't allow them to give full attention and care to these products, right? So this, not only is the system scaled up and expensive to get in, but they're designing products and picking products and packaging products in a way that they can't be screwed up by the time the customer grabs them. That's why there's so much plastic in produce now, for God's sake, right? It's all of that eliminating risk and the cost of the shrink in between harvest and the cash register.
So it kind of feels like we're losing some choices and transparency, frankly. I mean, you did talk about the hydroponic issue. There's a lot of labeling issues. There's so many labels out there, right? Do you want to talk about maybe which ones have meaning and what they mean, and which ones don't have a lot of meaning?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a group of 20 and 30 somethings, and they're very often young men, farmers, and I hear them talk a lot about organic is meaningless. And then the guy across the room says louder, yeah, organic is meaningless. And when you really get to know them and talk to them, they're a part of a community, and that community and their customers very often knows their farm, their family, and their practices. So they are recognized as responsible growers. And so they don't need that organic seal to communicate that to the community they're selling into. But then the epiphany comes when they need to sell outside of that local community, the CSAs, the restaurants, the farmers markets, and they want to sell into a large grocery chain or even a regional grocery chain. And the grocery chain says, so we need to tell our customers how these are grown. And the farmer says, oh, everybody knows me and then trusts me. And the buyer says, I don't. And magically, the organic seal becomes really important and really valuable and well worth the investment. So I'm still a believer in that. There are certainly the issues with hydroponic and a lack of transparency around hydroponic, letting consumers know what they're growing. All of the other seals add up to a lot, but when it comes to produce in particular that we're kind of focused on, the organic seal is still hard to beat.
Yeah. What about the word naturally raised? What does that mean?
I guess it means a little kid without a diaper. Is that? I'm pretty sure about that. It means nothing. I mean, I assume that there's a seal about that, but it's never anything that I thought had enough gravitas to look into. It's still, if someone's using a naturally raised seal or certification program, as I remember, that's a peer-reviewed community trust seal, and there isn't a very hard set of standard and auditing that goes with it.
Are you talking about certified naturally grown?
Yeah,
One?
potentially.
Okay.
They're just a little more. Again, it's like I described. Organic is meaningless if everybody trusts you anyway. Well, that's probably true. Um, the interesting thing there is the non-GMO butterfly has taken on a tremendous amount of meaning, and even though certified organic can't contain GMO, at least in any significant amounts, the butterfly and the organic seal together seem to form the biggest amount of trust for consumers right now. And in some cases, the butterfly in a conventional setting, hear me out, in a conventional setting, conventional grocery store, that butterfly, which doesn't add any cost and doesn't communicate much else, is a real powerful signal consumers. All things being considered, I want the butterfly. An interesting twist on how we see organic and all of the complexity and richness of the standard, and yet simply non-GMO is still a powerful trigger for people to make a choice with.
Yeah, but what's frustrating me is you've said that, you kind of need both. You definitely need both because the non-GMO seal can actually have higher amounts of Roundup if you're using it as a desiccant, right? And
right. And
so
full disclosure, I'm currently on the Non-GMO Project board, and in fact, that is a big strategic initiative now, is soil health, and I expect that to roll up into surveillance of those desiccants. So we haven't fully fleshed that out, but the standard is fully aware of its limitations and fully aware of also the expectations that consumers have put on it. So it's not trying to become an alternative organic, but so much expectation is put on that little butterfly, the poor thing. And so the Non-GMO Project has a really great opportunity to broaden their education on conventional non-organic foods, which certainly need a lot of help. And I would say for the record that the butterfly folks have no interest in denigrating organic or competing with it. But I have always been a very big critic of the Non-GMO Project for all the obvious reasons. However, someone said to me once in the Erewhon store in Southern California, they said, yeah, imagine the world without it, right? And it had to happen. It had to be created. And it's put some pressure on organic and allowed some behaviors that maybe we're not completely happy with. But all in all, I'm really glad it's there, and I like the direction it's going.
Okay, well, that's good to hear that they're considering that issue, because I think that is one of the biggest sources of confusion as a consumer, is that non-GMO project label could be the same as a conventional product. And so it does have all those pesticides. That's always been really frustrating to me, that confusion around that.
So for the record, Natural Grocers has hundreds of private label products now. They are almost all certified organic, and they say organic is naturally non-GMO.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
I think that's the right level of reminder for the consumers. So they see the non-GMO message in text, and we're reinforcing the idea that organic doesn't have GMO anyway. So there.
I want to go back to distribution, because I think you mentioned in your talk last time that we're down to maybe 2 major suppliers to the supermarkets.
So in the natural product space, which is typically interested in small scale natural and organic producers, I put up a couple of charts how UNFI in particular, aggregated dozens and dozens of small local distributors around the country. I think one of the last big acquisitions was Rainbow, which a lot of people still remember back out west as a major distributor. And then KeHE is the second big last man or last woman standing, and they did the same thing. They rolled up so many produce and natural products distributors in the last, I guess, 10 to 15 years. They have different focuses, and KeHE is still small enough and quite progressive around environmental and equity issues. Really good, well thought out public campaigns and principles and standards in place. And UNFI is just the gorilla in the room, servicing Whole Foods, definitely natural grocers, and in many of the 10,000 or so independent grocery stores. They also service the natural sections in some of the big chains. So even the self-distributing chains will have certain areas in the store that are serviced and supplied by UNFI. The importance there is that UNFI has its own category managers, and they want efficiency and they want the benefits of economies of scale. I swear to God, you enter any grocery store serviced by UNFI across the country, and you can tell it in an instance. The product selection, the brands, the placement, the co-placements, the planograms all look alike. And what's happening is, I think I used the example of Hain Celestial. So a buyer for UNFI can sit down with Hain Celestial, which might represent 30 plus brands, and put together a package deal for what they want to buy, the promotional dollars, the the bulk pricing, delivery to 14 warehouses or whatever the number is now, and boom, there's a $100 million deal done, and not just done once, but done for a year or 2 years or 5-year contract. Mm. What they're not going to do is sit down with Lindley and negotiate for $10,000 worth of tomatoes.
Yeah.
It's a better product. It's better for you. It's better for Durango. But it's so out of scale and out of the realm of possibility. And that's that centralized purchasing, the rationalization or the careful curation of SKUs, maximizing profits, and making it easy to train drivers and distribution centers and do all of the planning for a multinational logistical system. They want the fewest SKUs available at the largest margins. They could be on the call. I'd say, you want the fewest SKUs available in your system at the largest margins? Yeah, that's what we're a publicly traded company. That's what we're trying to do. So they seem like they're also playing the other end where they're bringing in new and local products, and they've had those programs to nurture and incubate small companies. But really, I'm going to call them on the carpet and say, that's because you're making bets on small companies that will roll up big enough to be acquired by a company like Hain. And then that's your fresh new introduction into your planogram. So there's not a lot of emotion and love and caring for the smallholder producer and the micro product, local project, regional product at those distributors. And remember, UNFI is only 15 some million. I haven't checked recently, but a real distributor and a real self-distributor like Kroger, I mean, that's 50 billion. Walmart's distribution of food internally and what's coming into them is 100 billion. So whatever the numbers actually are, that just gets more and more centralized, standardized, and rationalized and optimized. So we've really just left there's no seat at the table left. One of my favorite metaphors. There's no seat at the table left, adult table or children's table, for the smallholder farmer.
And it's not just because they're small that people want it, right? It's, it's the food that people really want to buy, either because it's more nutritious or it's being done in a climate, carbon sequestering way, or it just tastes better. So I actually want to touch on how the farmers are being treated in that whole process. I haven't experienced this because I'm too small, but, we have a blueberry grower that they can't sell their blueberries unless they go through a broker. And
Right.
he can't get a check until the end of the season. And then there's absolutely no proof for how much that broker has sold his product for. He just gets a check and he has no idea what the broker made in that deal. It just feels like the farmers are at the bottom of the, rung on all
Yeah.
that.
Unfortunately, when I do new farmer training for the CSU Extension Service and for kind of exactly this part of the conversation, and I warn them, what you think your distributor's going to pay you, cut it in half and pray. That's what you should expect in terms of cash. We've gone over a lot of those issues, but when it comes to berries and grain, the aronia berry market in the U.S. grew rapidly. They expanded production, growing, and processing capability, and that's for organic aronia berries. And yet, right now, almost all of them in any quantity are coming from Eastern Europe, especially Poland. So there's a global inequity and a global structural problem where when a market is developed, whether it's for blueberries or aronia berries or anything else, they will be taken overseas and propagated there, even if it's under organic standards and even a USDA accredited US certifier. You wonder about the true practices and the quality, the soil, the applications, and that kind of thing when things are so far away. But your heart breaks for the blueberry grower who's growing in the ground with organic inputs and has to compete with Eastern Europe, potentially substandard, and an entire industry of aronia berries, which is maybe it's not idled, but the growth in the processing side and finding markets is just a tremendous struggle. That's compounded by the problem with hydroponic berry production in particular. And anybody who's watched the fireworks at the NOSP knows that they are allowing raw ground that has been abused in any which way but loose to be treated with glyphosate, covered with plastic, and then container growing hydroponic systems plopped down right on top of it and be certified that day as organic. And that's just a travesty. I'm dedicating a good part of my time right now to putting that to an end and uncovering those practices. It's just such a different economic system, a different way of growing, and hiding them as soil in the ground organic. To me, it's just blatant consumer fraud.
We finally got Jennifer Tucker to say something about that and say that that wasn't okay.
Did she really, though?
Because, well, we can go back and look at the letter. I think there was still some confusion in the letter because she said on land we wouldn't allow that. And so what's happening is there's immediate transitions after, bombing a greenhouse with insecticides, anything else, pesticides, you can then convert it to organic. And the question then becomes, well, how many times can you do that? If you get an outbreak, can you do it again? So that became really confusing in that letter. But we did present, and she didn't talk about it for a long time, but we did present a letter from AmeriCert that they were doing this, that they were immediately allowing the certification of ground that had been sprayed with glyphosate and then covered. And they were asking the question, can we do this? And, Jenny kept saying, this is hypothetical. We don't know if this is happening. And then we presented this letter. We finally got that ambiguous letter back that, okay, we're not going to allow this on ground. but it left it, or on land, she kept saying. So we still have a lot of kind of trickery, it seems like, in the wording of what we get back from the NOP.
Right. One thing we could do with a new administration, assuming we get one, is get the FTC involved in that issue. It's false and misleading to be selling organic that aren't grown in soil in the ground in a biological system anyway.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I'm working on heavily right now is writing a clean hydroponic standard so that those people that are fraudulently producing certified organic without soil could switch over to a hydroponic standard that conforms to OMRI listed ingredients and the NOP national list, but develop their own trust and authority within that brand or within that seal. And it also might
simply
be
call it hydroponic. There could be transparency.
Oh my God, no transparency. I'm going to plant this seed and without going into too much detail, but the organization we founded is called the Alliance for Sustainable Hydroponics. Since the Alliance for Sustainable Organics was taken by the hydroponic industry. So
the Coalition for Sustainable Organics. Yours sounds pretty close, doesn't it?
The Alliance for Sustainable Hydroponics has created a seal called the Clean Hydroponic Produce Seal. And Scope 1 is complete, and it references growing inside of closed buildings or closed shipping containers, which are very susceptible to mold and mildew and algae and pest infestations, because once it gets in, it can't get out. And the key issue there is preventive pest control of all kinds and the quality of the OMRI listed nutrients that are used to grow the produce, and of course using certified organic seeds. So there's there's four legs to that chair, because organic likes their legs on their stools, but there's 4 legs to the stairs. If you're going to participate, you have to be transparent with consumers. You have to commit to participating in an ongoing nutrient density study to see just what's in there and how valuable it is and what the discrepancy are compared to organically grown versions of the identical seed. You have to disclose energy use, because I have yet to talk to a hydroponic grower who wants to talk about energy. They're all about the water savings, but not about the energy savings.
Yeah.
And then be compliant with OMRI listed inputs of all kinds. So it's not going to be particularly complicated or expensive, because your limitations within one of those closed containers is pretty clear what it can and can't do. One of the motivations for that clean standard is that the marijuana industry, of which Colorado is quite fond, has a very robust regulation of marijuana grows, which for security reasons had to be inside. But if you look at the fungicides and pesticides and miticides and disinfectants and water treatments that are used by the marijuana industry, it is potentially one of the dirtiest products ever produced by man. And so that was one of our foils was, if that's how dirty indoor hydroponics can be, we're going to write a standard that says you got to do it this way to make sure that the heavy metals, the pesticide load, the solvents, the mycotoxins, and the pesticide residues are de minimis background residues and not the result of really dangerous practices. So the Clean Hydroponic Produce Standard from the Alliance for Sustainable Hydroponics is ready to be announced. I think you'll hear something on August 26th, hint, hint. And in fact, Natural Grocers will be testing this standard in real life in a hydroponic grow with all of those 4 legs in place, beginning with transparency about how these things are being grown and delivered on site in the middle of December.
Are we going to require hydroponic containers, which really, in my opinion, there was no difference between a hydroponic and a container grown product? Will they have to go through this certification?
Well, when I said container grown, I meant shipping container.
Okay.
But yes, The scope 1 is relatively easy because it's literally contained in a box. Scope 2 and scope 3. Scope 2 would be it's in usually a hothouse with some artificial lighting before and after the sun is available. But because it's enclosed and it's in some sort of container or some sort of medium that's not soil connected to the ground, there's a separate scope on that, which is significantly more complicated, needs significantly more stakeholder input. And then scope 3 is what you're describing with that blueberry grower out in Florida who's just putting containers of some medium on top of plastic and letting the sun do its magic, but feeding it with nutrition through IV tubes and with liquid nutrition. Again, a slightly different set of standards. So scope 1, I was able to tackle myself with some PhDs and people with experience. Scope 2 and 3, if we get traction, will be larger industry stakeholder groups that have to do that. Yeah. But make no mistake, the idea is here's a more appropriate standard for these growing methods that result in cleaner products and don't confuse, mislead, and to fraudulent sales to consumers by using the organic seal.
Yeah, I think that's all that anybody ever wanted was just that transparency. It's clearly a different production method than organic. And it sounds like you're working towards creating that transparency. In the meantime, we have a situation where, 70% of the organic berries on the shelves right now are Driscoll's. And it seems like it's almost an antitrust lawsuit or something. It's a complete monopoly for these hydroponic organic systems. And I'm wondering what we do in the meantime.
They claim very proudly that those are 1,000 independent smallholder growers. And they're proud of having developed that system. When you talk to the berry growers about the requirements that are placed on them and the profits that are allowed to them, it smells suspiciously like a chicken tournament where everything is controlled by the overseeing corporation and you get some income from participating. That is not what they make you feel like when you listen to their commercial, so to speak, their presentations on their growers and shareholders. I'm not an expert on that end of things by any means, but I think to put the most positive spin on it as possible, those 1,000 growers can therefore sell to Costco. And were they growing outside of the Driscoll brand and outside of all the Driscoll requirements that have particular packaging and species and production methods and a master growing schedule for who gets to plant and harvest when, that's how they're bridging that gap and getting into the largest retailers around the world. If the farmers are actually happy with that and there's equitable treatment and good treatment of the land, if there's land involved, Lindley, then, it's an uncomfortable but possible solution to how shareholders meet with that industrial food distribution system. I think it's worthy investigation. Don't take my comments as an endorsement, but there's always so much complexity. You have to be open to asking the question honestly and positively. So why did they do what they did? Well, they did what they did in tandem with the retailers and the largest distributors to give them what they wanted. And we end up with the Driscoll system.
It's too bad that it's not, because I could see that working really well if somehow it was creating the blueberry that everybody wanted to buy. Right?
Yeah.
If we could get to that point.
I'd like them to put flavor back into strawberries too. If you get a tasty strawberry in a Driscoll's package, you're surprised. I mean, like, oh my God, what happened? I mean, that's really a decorative item for food displays. It's not really a phytonutrient friendly, tasty delicacy anymore. That's the kind of human cost of the scaled up industrial food distribution and retail system, is that loss of flavor in tomatoes and strawberries and haven't had a good mango and rarely have a good avocado. Um, Apart from all the economic equity issues for smallholders who don't have a seat at the table at all. They provide the best thing that humans really want to eat, and yet we have set up a system where they don't have access, where we don't allow ourselves access to what you grow. It's massively complex and it'll be difficult to untie, but so many people are working on it. I'm actually optimistic, maybe not in my lifetime, Lindley, but I'm optimistic that the realization of the problem and the pushback is well underway.
Yeah, I think people are starting to connect that loss of taste to loss of nutrition.
Yes.
Which I think for a while that there was kind of a missing link, and we've almost forgotten what it really should taste like. But there is a lot more local production. People are finding, their farmers markets. Oh yeah, here's where strawberries actually taste like strawberries, and they're craving that again.
Right.
So there's a little bit of hope there.
That's
I'm wondering.
Let me just add to that it's one of the, I hate to say silver lining, but it's one of the consequences of COVID and relocalization, at least temporarily, of buying fresh food. Is you're getting better quality, fresher, tastier food. And that's driven by this sudden panic about maintaining your health. If there's a narrative that I want to amplify and encourage, it's that health depends on nutrition, and nutrition depends on nutritious food, as you just pointed out.
Yeah, the strawberries even have a smell.
Yeah.
They used to, It's like you open the container and there's no aroma coming out. And so what else is missing, right?
Right.
You're on the Real Organic Project Standards Board. I'm wondering how you feel, whether this can make a difference. Us, the farmers coming together. Maybe explain a little bit why you agreed to be part of it and what your hopes are.
Yeah, I think it has already made a tremendous difference. It's you can call it a line in the sand, but it clearly articulated for many, many Americans where the organic program went wrong, and where organizations like the OTA under Laura Bacha just allied with the industrial food system and threw the smallholder under the bus. I'm going to make a dig here. They claim to represent 7,000 farmers, but that includes anyone who's associated with CCOF or Driscoll's or any other big group that's a member. But when they actually have the farmer fly-in day to DC, 7 farmers is how many they could collect to actually talk to people on Capitol Hill. So I have no idea where I was going with that or what the question was, but I got it off my chest. So maybe you need to lead me by the nose a little bit.
What are your hopes for the Real Organic Project?
So Real Organic Project, it makes it a pleasure to go to Capitol Hill now or talk to legislators or community groups about organic, because so many people were hearing objectively or subjectively that organic is now meaningless or compromised or not worth the money. But when you can bring them back to the Real Organic Project standard, no CAFOs, no hydroponic, there's a couple more legs to their stool. It's because it's a sophisticated bunch of guys and women. But it gives them hope that they understand that the big industrial system compromised organic, but it's incredibly assuring to them that the core of organic is still being respected and protected and amplified. And not being heard is a citizen's greatest fear. And ROP is allowing that current in American life to be heard. We're still fighting for this that matters. Matters at the community level, the farmer level, the nutrition level, the economic level, and the health level all at once. So it's a really important narrative and story that I share with people all the time. It doesn't mean big organic is going to kill you or it doesn't have a value or a place. But, for lack of I think I watched too many Star Wars movies during COVID, but it only takes that one last Jedi or that one last group or that one last rebel base to give people hope. And Real Organic Project has gelled so quickly, has been so diligent and so focused that people are hanging a lot on its success.
What do you, and it's funny that you said, God, I got that off my chest, because that's been the role of the Real Organic Project, traveling farm to farm. We let the video camera just roll, and the farmers get a lot off their chests because we came to them in their fields in the middle of their day and said, what do you want to say? You know?
Yeah, and you were there to listen and amplify and
Yeah.
memorialize. I mean, we don't get that chance, right? It's too big and too complicated and too much big industrial media for that matter. So it's these person-to-person conversations and these groups that are really focused on their principles and values that are making all the difference right now.
And the farmers are so underworked and underpaid. Or, sorry,
Underworked and overpaid. Yeah,
right,
I agree.
Right. Do you have advice for eaters beyond, make good choices for yourself with your purchasing dollar in terms of organizing and how they can help build the movement, grow the movement?
The advice that I would give is admittedly elitist, because when we say get to know your farmer, drive out to a farm, find the butcher, spend some time on the farm, that all assumes that you have transportation and gas and time and all of the resources that it would take to stop your life to go do that, right? So all those things are true. But again, the odd silver lining for COVID is the number of urban gardens and community gardens and different nexuses for finding food activists and food production a walk away from your house, or a short drive or a short bike ride away from your house, where you can bring your kids so you don't need childcare, where there's activities where you'll be welcomed. And so I'm going to say nobody should have an excuse. And worst comes to worst, you can get free seeds or pay a couple dollars for some seeds and plant something in any bit of dirt you have access to. It sounds poetic and prosaic at the same time, but growing something in this environment and with all the stress of our lives is an incredible act of faith, right? And it is farming. Even if you really yield nothing, you're serving the soil and you're uplifting people who see what you're doing and feeling good about what you're doing. So yeah, buy the better products. See if you can buy direct and pay a good price to your local producer. Grow something, participate in your community. Because it's never just about food or farming. A farm without a community is just a factory in dirt, right? And bringing that vulnerability of joining a community or a group in your community is really the biggest hurdle to food activism. People want to sit back and analyze and tell. They don't want to risk showing up on a farm and not knowing anything about farming, or showing up at the garden and not knowing their neighbors. So I broadened your question substantially. I hope you don't mind, but those are the theoretical seeds that we can all plant right now that'll grow into a bigger movement and merge with the bigger movement. So everybody can do those things.
I love that word seed too, just because it's the start of something. There's so much optimism in a seed, and there's so much beauty in the biodiversity of just holding, a beautiful pile of compost or enriched soil, and in the smells and the sounds of everything that's on a farm. And one of the amazing things I'm just remembering now when you said the word seed is that you said that if a seed is raised from a hydroponic tomato or from a hydroponic product, it isn't as viable in some way. Is that true? Is that where I heard that from? Was from you?
The seed industry is selecting seeds for their ability to thrive in a hydroponic environment. And I think it's Vitalis Seed Company that does that. But even respected long-term organic seed growers like Johnny's Select, you can sort for hydroponic friendly seeds, pelleted hydroponic organic friendly seeds on there. And ultimately that ends up with seeds over generations that they're not going to like this. In fact, the Vitalis people ran after me at the symposium and asked me to retract it. But ultimately, we will end up with seeds selected that don't do well in soil because they like that permanent 68 degree, 50% humidity, consistent nutrient wash on their roots. And they can't deal with wind and rain and a dust storm and 5 days without water, right? So yeah, it seems great on the one hand. Well, let's find species and adapt them or select them for those traits. But in the long term of human survivability, it won't be hydroponics that save us. It'll be robust, biodiverse farms and communities that save us.
Yeah, and that to me is just so beautiful. So why not, right? Why not do it?
Yeah.
There's so much beauty there. Well, thank you, Alan, for all your time today and for being so raw and open.
Well, hope it wasn't too raw or too open, but yeah, it's always really fun to talk to you. I feel like we're neighbors and yet I don't see you except in Vermont. So I hope that happens in 2021.
Neighbors just 7 hours away or something, right?
Yeah, well, it's the West,
Colorado's
right? That's a day's drive.
That's right.
Good to talk to you.
Well, it's good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you'll subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review. A video version of this interview, as well as the full transcript with links related to our conversation, is found at realorganicproject.org/episode 44. Please join us next time when our guest will be Eric Seidemann. He's a farmer, scientist, and policy expert who is a longtime technical support agent with MOFGA, the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. To find a Real Organic farm near you, visit realorganicproject.org/farms.